All right, guys. In this lecture, we are going to cover variables and expressions. So, so variables is a place to hold a value. You may consider it as a placeholder to store something. So, for example, here, X is a variable and you're assigning a value 5 to it. So if you remember that I had been talking about like using a term object or something else, but anything that stores a value, you may consider it as a variable. And the reason why we call it variable because the value in this particular placeholder can vary. We can update the value of X from 5 to 7, from 5 to 7 to like even a decimal value, let's say 2.5, etc., etc. Okay. It can have an integer value. It can have another value of a variable assigned previously. It can also have like a series of characters, which we commonly refer to as strings. And similarly, it can have a floating point value, just like in this one. So decimal value, the any numerical value containing a decimal point in programming language, it is commonly referred as a floating point value. Okay. And when we assign a value to any variable, it is simply called an assignment, and this is called an assignment statement. So a common example is to increment a variable. So we have a value x and we want to increment the value of x by 1. So every time this statement is executed, the value of x is incremented by 1. So assume that if x is initialized with the value 5, so x is equal x plus 1, which is 5 plus 1 is incremented and is stored in the value stored in the variable x again. So initialize with 5, something initialized with 5, running it once will increment the value of x to 6 and then 7 and so on and so forth. So we can actually, this is a shorthand form of writing the same expression, x equal x plus 1. It can be written as x plus equal 1. This is called the compound operator, which we'll be talking about later. Okay, so identifiers. So in our program, we give a meaningful name to variables. Sometimes we create classes, sometimes we create functions, and we will be talking about these things later on as we move on this course. But identifier is a name given to various items. Okay, so we have already talked about giving a name to a variable as x, as y, or an age, or whatever. So the rules is that a sequence of letter, it can contain sequence of letter, the lowercase letter, uppercase letters. It may contain underscore. It may also contain digits. But it must always start either with a letter or an underscore. It can never start with a, let's say, a digit. So a variable name starting from 10, let's say 10 digit, 10 April, is not a valid variable. Okay. So it is also case sensitive, which means that the uppercase capital T, uppercase T temperature is different variable than the lowercase t temperature. Okay, so there are two different um, variables and they may contain two different values. So names starting and ending with double underscores are also allowed, like this one, double underscore init, double underscore init, sorry, double underscore. But it should be avoided because it has a special meaning and there are usually some keywords, some built-in variables that are already defined with the with following this convention, following double underscore. So although you're free to name your variable like this, but it should be avoided. Next thing is the good variable names should have a meaningful, I mean, it should describe the purpose of the variable. So instead of having a variable a equals containing the value of age, we should define it completely, let's say age. So there are some reserved words which we should not be using and we cannot use actually. These are commonly referred as keywords in Python. And these are the keywords, let's say starting off with the uppercase F, and the false keyword is a keyword used for a meaningful purpose, which I will be talking about later. Similarly, there are some other keywords, let's say break, else, import, with, while. There are some special keywords, and these are special programming constructs which we cannot use to name our own variables. Okay, let's talk about the style guidelines. So we always use, while defining a variable, we always use lowercase letters. We should be including underscores between words to make the words more sensible, make the variable names more sensible. So there is a proposal, there is a special guideline with the name PEP 8, which is called Python Enhancement Proposal number 8, which outlines the basics of how to write Python code neatly and consistently. And this is very important. So when you're writing code, it is better that you start practicing the standard guidelines for writing a code. So, and it is important from the perspective that when you are applying for the and for a job, the employer might ask you to share your coding that you have developed, that any piece of code that you have developed in past. And the reason why they would like to have a look at your coding style, writing style. Okay. And if you are in a habit of following your own convention, then that may not be that um, developers friendly, because if a term that you're using that is worldwide accepted, that is a standard term, then anyone reading your code would be able to actually understand what you have written. And this is very important factor. Like, your code must be readable by others. And when you are programming, when you are developing your code in a company, so you will often be developing in a group. So certain portion of a code you would be working on, another portion of a code some of your colleague might be working on. So it is very important that you should be able to understand their logic and their code, and they should be able to understand yours. Okay, so it's better that you start practicing the guidelines, the standard guidelines of how to write a Python code. What characters you should be using, whether you should be using a lowercase characters, lowercase letters, lowercase like a camel case letters for defining certain variable or function name, or the class name, object name. So you should have a look at this. So in the slides, it has a link in there, and if you can also see the link being displayed here, PEP 8. um, I don't know for what reason it's not showing up here. Anyway, so for example, if you're writing a code in which you have to store the number of students attending UCLA, so if you have to store the value, so instead of giving a variable name like UCLA, num, and u, it is better that you give it a proper name, which makes the purpose of the variable evident, like num underscore students underscore UCLA. So if I'm reading your code, I can clearly see that what you are trying to store in this particular variable. Okay. All right. So let's talk about the arithmetic expressions in the next video.